So I'm looking at Chris because he's at the top of one of these large structures. Do you think the corporate structure will stay the same in 5 or, well, let's say 2030? Is that organisation still going to be structured in the same way?
I have no idea, but I think that's the key issue really, is that the only certainty in all of that is there's going to be quite significant change. If you look back 5 or 10 or 15 and go forward the same sort of distance, you can't contemplate exactly what it'll be. But there are a series of things that will be inherent in any successful sort of organisation. And I totally agree with your point about more and more, and Tim made the point earlier about the robotics and those types of innovations that take away the human error, they take away the need for, I mentioned earlier about the hands so much, the less of us will be on personal exertion type work and the like. You see already happening now in China with consumption becoming a bigger part of their economy. Next step will be services. The healthcare, education, hospitality, entertainment. They're all functions of people that are going to. Jobs will be less requiring physical outputs from people and more mental stimulation. And the one factor that's going to be consistent, no matter what that future looks like, is going to be leadership, and it's going to need to be quite adaptive, flexible, and it'll be differently framed and differently informed, and that will morph as it sort of comes through. Successful organisations will prosper, and others will die, and that's inevitable. That's capitalism. It's adapt or die. You're going to be part of this process. But to be precise about what it's going to be, no idea. But I think it would be good if we just sort of said that we've got people here trying to generate an outcome. I'm ambivalent whether they're procurement, whether they're accounting, whether they're engineering, whether they're marketing, sales, whatever. Meaningless. It's really, do we take the organisation forward to where we want to take it, or where we think we want to take it, because that's also got to be modified as well.
And if you look at the 5-year journey of your organisation, are you seeing that change in leadership and that kind of flattening of structure and potentially the silos being broken down?
Yeah, we go, take procurement by way of example. It doesn't come anywhere near the finance organisation as such. It's part of the overall corporate outcome metrics and those sorts of things. And the metrics they're totally imperfect metrics. I mean, absolutely imperfect metrics. They're line item metrics, the things like that you want to, you reduce it down to something that you can sort of score, but it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. So I think, the organisations are changing. By definition, you've got, we've got some regulatory constraints about you've got to have a qualified mining engineer in charge of an operation at a site. There's no alternative to that. It's a regulated thing. But you can have generalists anywhere. You can have generalists in any sorts of jobs. So how we access inputs, more collaboration further up. I mean, absolutely. We've been on that journey for 20 years. Breaking down sort of monopoly strangleholds and those sorts of things, inducing competition, emerging markets. There's a whole continent still to come, with Africa being denied sort of progress really by a variety of forces.
Helen is itching to say something.
Well, no, it was something you said earlier, Chris, which got me all excited, and I've put something on Twitter. But this thing about less about heads and hands and more about hearts and minds. And I think, when we talk about how we might articulate sentiment as financial value, that's got to come from minds, isn't it? And one of the things that we might have talked about earlier when we talked about people was about, what's new for people coming forward. And I think there's 2 strands to that. There's the thing about people, intellect, knowledge, where we get that from. And a chap called Seth Godin that people might have heard of wrote a paper called Stop Stealing Dreams about what the new model of education is going to be like and how people learn. And with knowledge at your fingertips, it's much more about minds, isn't it, than it is about heads and being able to access that and use that and innovate. I think the other thing going forward is the thing about networks. is about the coming together as networks virtually or whatever to create ideas. I mean, it's quite an old mastermind group, Napoleon Hill and so on, quite an old idea. But again, all this technology, all this social media, all this way to collaborate means that you've got the knowledge, you've got the ability to collaborate, and that's the exciting thing about 2030. And how the firm is structured, I think, might not be so much about physical co-location, but about virtual co-location, and much more of this supervising in Perth or collaborating across continents. So for me, that's what I think is going to be different in 2030, is the whole way that we operate in terms of knowledge and understanding and moving forward.
Olinga.
I totally agree with you. And if I can give you, believe it or not, I'm a professor in social enterprise and a professor of citizenship, enterprise governance and capacity development. And I guess if I give you a time scale of how this, I can't predict what's going to happen in 2030, but I can give you a trend. If we go back 100 years ago, our framework for society was very much philanthropic. That's why America is built on philanthropy, which is I make loads of money, and then out of kindness, I'm going to give it to others. Then it became, about 20 years ago, it became CSR agenda, like corporate social responsibility, which is transactional, which is, give me your logo, here's a check, don't speak to me again, because I really don't care. And it'll be cats next year, by the way. So then it became 8 years ago, it became sustainability, where, it doesn't matter what a bad bank I am, but look at my headquarters in Canary Wharf, it's made of green bricks, so it doesn't matter, it's okay now. Today, it's about social impact. The ones that's going forward now, it's very clear, is about citizenship, multi-stakeholder engagement. Barclays don't have CSR department. Nationwide, Imperial Tobacco don't have CSR departments. They all call them citizenship departments. Because, like John Lewis, multi-stakeholder environments with your suppliers, with your customers, with your staff, with your board, with your shareholders, with government, tax avoidance, pay disparity, with the environment. And I can see that trend going every few years, about every 5 years, it regenerates and improves. So I don't know where 2030 is going to look like. From my little view, I think by then we will value the financial value as much as the other stuff, which are, social value, intangibles, whatever you call it. And because there are certainly trends right now, don't we? In LinkedIn, how many people have I networked with? In Facebook, how many likes do I have? In Twitter, how many people? It's about, you can call it surveys, you can call it feedback loops. In the EU, we've introduced legislation for this, about how you measure social impact. It's got to have feedback now. Without it, you're just shouting out, you're not hearing back. So that's a trend. So we can only talk about trends to 2030. But I would like to think it will be by 2030, 50-50 relationship. And that means in accounting purposes, in your UK GAAP, general accounting principles, US GAAP, on the balance sheet, you will be saying, this is how much financial value I've created, this is how much other values I've created, that's what my company's worth, invest in me, buy my shares, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
We all know that 98% of European companies are SMEs. So what's the future of procurement in this specific world of SMEs?
It's a great point. And granted, I can't claim that I'm from here, but I come here a lot. But especially studying what's happened within Germany with the rise of the Mittelstand, and looking across Europe, I think once we get below a certain point, procurement becomes slightly less interesting. So let's cut it off at 100 employees or 10 million in revenue. But I think the golden age for procurement within SMBs is about to happen. If you look at where technology has been, which I think technology is a huge asset, I'm a student of it, I talk about it and research it all the time in procurement, it's really been about empowering large organizations. If you look at the systems for e-procurement, for contract management, for supply chain network design, where sourcing really meets the supply chain, it's all been about big companies. But now, all of a sudden, things are changing dramatically. So earlier this week, Amazon released Amazon Business. It is a basic e-procurement system as part of Amazon, which is free. It's not great, it's not bad. But all of a sudden, we've got Amazon pricing now on business items, actually better than Amazon's consumer pricing. And so what happens now as a small business when I don't need to go negotiate with Staples and Grainger and others, but I can actually see a benchmark price on Amazon just by signing up. What happens when I can get transactional buying applications in the App Store? All of a sudden, we're in a world where a finance director, a head of technology, not even a CIO of a smaller company, can have the same power that we had 5-10 years ago through Ariba, through SAP, through other systems. And we don't even have to negotiate with distributors anymore. We can just go online and see the Amazon business benchmark price. So I think it's going to be a great world for SMBs in the next 15 years.
First, I think it's a great idea. One that you're essentially lifting the procurement burden from the procurement organization. But when you talk about smaller and medium-sized enterprises, I'd go back to that thought: is what can procurement really do? If procurement isn't really adding a lot to the bottom line in small enterprises, particularly if they can avail themselves of tools, then shouldn't procurement be thinking much more about how it in fact manages that conversation with the supply base around innovation? And I think that's the high ground. Can you harness the conversation that says, I know how to seek and find innovation, and I can take that conversation and pull it back to my organization without a bunch of internal organizations trying to kill that? Can I take that conversation and bring it back through to my ultimate customer? So I would ask the question is can procurement play a bigger role? Sure. Talk about innovation. Make sure that you're having that effective conversation.
Just very quickly, because I don't want to hog this thing. There's three, in the EU, we've introduced some certain laws about this. In Europe, you've asked about Europe, there are 165 million companies in Europe. That correlates to 35 million in America, 40 million in China, about 1 billion in the world. In the EU, we've broken it down to say a few things which in favor of SMEs. That is, anything, first of all, over 500 staff. It came out 15th of April last year. They got to behave in procurement in a certain way. It's a directive now. Anything below 500 comes in something called hyperlocality. In other words, if you're an SME, you have an advantage now. Because when you're going for procurement, and companies do that now, they say, how many local suppliers do we have? How much, what can we buy from locally to ourselves, etc. Hyperlocality, in other words, what you're doing within your own region is actually becoming an instrument for change in procurement. And so, we're introducing some laws in the EU regarding that, and it's being measured. Hyperlocality is now part of any impact fund in the EU now, as of last year, 15th of June, has to deliver 20% social impact. And that means local small companies have much bigger advantage than big boys.